Dave Clegg. I'm running for Congress in New York 19. I'm a Democrat. I'm running for a number of reasons, the biggest one of which is that I think our entire democracy is heading in the wrong direction right now. And I think it was time to stand up and stop the Trumpism that's happening and stop the politicians like Faso who are just catering to the wealthy and just taking care of the wealthy and not listening to us and not showing up and not representing us properly.
How do you feel about running against 6 other people?
I would rather be running against Faso right now, as we said. Running against 6 people who I respect every one of them. So that's when you compete with someone, you'd like to compete where you can really go after your competition. That isn't the way we're handling this, and it's fine. I think what's good about our level of involvement is that we are all plowing the fields, we are all planting seeds, we are all trying to get out the vote, we are all working to awaken all the voters out there of how important this election is. That's the plus side. And so I would rather not have had 25 or more forums with 7 people that we really don't get the chance to communicate the depth of our analysis and our understanding and our knowledge, but that's what we have.
What makes you stand out from the other candidates?
Well, I'm in a completely different category in terms of my involvement in the community and my time in the community. So I'm at the, let's hope, the zenith of my career. So I've had a long career in this district, raising my family, been involved in doing things that are really constructive in the community, that have made our community a better place to live for almost 4 decades. So that's something that's a place no one else can fit in this campaign. And one of the reasons I was asked to get involved in this election was because of that. That this is an election that needs a grassroots candidate, somebody who has all of those roots in this community for a long period of time, and it's proven and you can't question it. And that's the position that I fill.
Okay. Where are you from originally and where do you live now? And can you go into details about what you do in your community?
Sure. So I was originally from Staten Island. I grew up in a poor working family. My father was the son of an immigrant Scottish woman and grew up in the Depression, never had a decent job. Never got to be in a union position. Worked 2 jobs. We had 6 kids. I was the only boy, and I was the one who kind of took things on my shoulders and made sure that our coal furnace got heated up in the morning and the ashes got taken out in the afternoon. And so those are kinds of things that I grew up with. We were paycheck to paycheck family. We almost lost the house a couple of times. My father lost his job once. I got appendicitis when I was 10 years old. Those things almost made us unable to meet our mortgage obligations. I remember those times. Those are times you don't forget. So I know what it is, all those folks out there, and there's a lot of folks out there that are going through the same kind of things, especially with medical problems. And in Ulster County, I'm familiar with what's going on with the foreclosures, and about half of them deal with medical bills. That was the start of what happened to those folks. So I have that background. I was lucky as when I was in junior high school, I had a friend who wanted to take the test for Brooklyn Tech. And I didn't know anything about it, but I went along with him to take the test, and I got into Brooklyn Tech. So I traveled 2 hours each way to high school every day from Staten Island. But it made all the difference in my educational experience that we had really bright, diverse students from all over the city, and just raised my level of academic involvement and accomplishment. So that was fortunate. My father got sick, and I actually had to leave college in my first year and work full-time and I went to night school for a year. And then my father was able to go back to work, so I could stop working full-time, and I transferred to New Paltz and graduated from New Paltz in 1974, magna cum laude, not that that matters at this point in time, but I had a scholarship to SUNY Buffalo Law School. Went there. Once again, I did well. I was on law review. I was on moot court. I was a top 10% my class. I decided to do an internship at I was fortunate to get the opportunity actually to do an internship at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund with Jack Greenberg, who had, as you know, had worked with Thurgood Marshall and the Brown v. Board of Education. They were doing tremendous work. I got to spend the summer there working on Supreme Court briefs that were trying to attack the disproportionate impact of the death penalty on black men throughout the country. You know that how many more, the likelihood was about 10 to 15 times more that a black person would get the death penalty than a white male. So we attacked those things, and that was formative for me. I went back. I did talk to corporate firms in Washington, D.C., in New York City, and Philadelphia. I had job offers, but I decided I wanted to do something different, and I decided to do national service, and I went out and I was a VISTA volunteer, and I worked at out of the Nebraska Indian Commission as an attorney on working with off and on reservation Native Americans, the Lakota population out in Pine Ridge and Rosebud reservations. That actually happened shortly after the occupation of Wounded Knee by the American Indian movement back in the early 70s. So it was a very volatile time, and there was a lot of angst in the community and a lot of oppression in the community. And I was just a young attorney, but ready to be a trial lawyer and ready to take on the powers that be. And I had the chance. It was an opportunity that only comes around once in a lifetime almost, because as a young attorney right out of law school, I had the chance to do class action lawsuits, major civil rights cases, taking on the injustices that were rampant throughout the community. The local jail, you know, we had, you ever hear of White Clay? There was an article about that out of the Times for a while. It's a little town right under the Pine Ridge Reservation in Nebraska. It sells more liquor than any little town in the country by like 20 times over. It's because they don't allow alcohol on the reservation, and these people are vultures, and they take advantage of the Indian population, which has alcoholism as one of its major problems. People come off the reservation, get drunk, get in trouble, get thrown in the Sheridan County Jail. I was there working with the public defender. Initially, the name for him was by the Indian community was penitentiary plans, because he had never won a case. And so I started taking over some of his cases. And for the first time in recorded history, Native American won a case in the Sheridan County Courthouse, and a criminal case. And then I looked at what was happening in jail, and they had bundling 10 people at a time in an 8-by-cell jail cell and not feeding them, not giving them exercise. So I went down to the Native American Rights Fund in Boulder, Colorado. I said, what can I do here? And they helped me. I mean, I couldn't do it all by myself, but they showed me what I can do to bring class action. So I figured it out, brought it in federal court in Omaha, and I won a class action lawsuit against the Sheridan County Jail and changed the conditions of the Sheridan County Jail. So those were some things I did. There's a lot of cases that I did back then that, once again, I had an opportunity to bring big cases. I had a case that went all the way to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, which I won, which was a habeas corpus petition on behalf of a Native American man who was improperly represented by a public defender who told him to plead guilty to 4 felonies he wasn't responsible for, even though he'd gotten shot twice by a white rancher who accused him falsely of stealing something to get out from under it. And I won that case. That was a Hawkman case. And I had an opportunity to do a lot of important work. And then I came back here after doing that for 4 years. I came back in 1981. I talk about this on the campaign trail. My wife was pregnant. We wanted to raise our family here. I knew the Hudson Valley, our families were here. And my daughter had congenital problems when she was born that we didn't know about. And she almost died at birth. And she had long-term medical care needs. And our COBRA policy was something we picked up to make sure we had our family covered. And the insurance company decided that since it was a congenital condition, that it was a pre-existing condition. So they cut off the care of my daughter. Once again, that's a formative experience. We were coming back. I earned a total of $341 a month as a Vista volunteer. We didn't come back with any money. We put all the stuff in our world on our station wagon and drove back from Nebraska. So it was a really scary time for us. What were we going to do? Now, of course, I'm a lawyer, and I challenged that, and we successfully challenged it, and we got the care that my daughter needed. But I've never forgotten that an insurance company was ready to put their profit level over my daughter's life. And I've been representing people for the last 37 years here and 40 years altogether. I have fought against insurance companies cutting off people hundreds and hundreds of times, especially in workers' comp cases and no-fault cases where I represent people. And the insurance companies make a policy of cutting people off as soon as they can justify it. And they use doctors, IME doctors that work for them, and that we have a treating doctor who's trying to make this person better and cure them, and you have an IME doctor who disagrees with a treating doctor and says no, they can go back to work. 1,000 times that over is when that happens. So I've run up against and fought against insurance companies my whole career, where they're trying to cut people off from health care that they need to get back, to get healthy, to get better. So I'm all for 100% Medicare for all. Get the insurance companies out of our healthcare system. Get the profit out of our healthcare system. Let's make sure people get the care they need. That's simple. Get them the care they need. And I do think it would be transformative. I've had 7 forums on this issue throughout the counties, in 6 different counties. And I could go on for a long time about Medicare for all and why I believe it's important. But I'm just 100% behind it. So the work in our community, starting off, I was centered out of a legal services program in Nebraska. And so when I came back here, I wanted to support the local legal services program. So I immediately got on the board of Mid-Hudson Legal Services down in Poughkeepsie. I became the president of the board, and I stayed with them for about 6 years until they changed and they were taken over by Westchester. And so that was my early work, as well as I had a friend, Ralph Darmstadt. I'm a Methodist. He was a Methodist minister down in the Rondout part of Kingston. He had his parsonage. He was taking in 6 to 8 homeless people every night, feeding them, taking care of them, and housing them. And we got together and said, we got to do something better than this. I mean, what you're doing is amazing. So we got together a steering committee. We brought in the Methodist churches and the Kingston area council of churches and the family of Woodstock. And we formed a steering committee, and we got all the grants together, and we built the first homeless shelter in Ulster County in the basement of the Trinity United Methodist Church. And that was in the 80s. After that, I got involved in Habitat for Humanity. Some of the people I worked with on the homeless shelter, they wanted to get that going. So I got on the initial board, and I actually did the work to incorporate it, and we got Habitat for Humanity off the ground. I've been involved in a lot of different community activities, whether it be, I was on the Boy Scout, Rip Van Winkle Boy Scout Council for 10 years. I was involved in Troop 8. My son was in Troop 8, became an Eagle Scout, but I was supportive of the Boy Scouts. I've been involved in the soup kitchens, the Caring Hands Soup Kitchen, which feeds 300 people a week at Clinton Avenue United Methodist Church. It's the food portion of that is separate from the church, so I've been on the Caring Hands board for 20 years and doing that since the 80s. I was involved as a public defender for 9 years, representing people, indigent people, throughout the county, both in city court, and I tell stories, not stories, but my experience is there because I was in city court in Kingston during the crack cocaine epidemic and the AIDS epidemic, and working with people who are addicted and trying and fighting, the fight that I could to get people out of the incarceration mold and into the rehabilitation mold, and fighting against the powers that be at the time, which were not as cooperative as they should have been in getting people rehabilitation. Sending people in, there was just the MO. Well, you got an addiction, I don't care. You got possession of drug, you're going to go to jail. And of course, I was on the other side trying to get people treatment and rehabilitation, and I was successful. And I was a very good attorney, so I won more trials as a public defender than any other public defender in Ulster County. I was 6 for 7, which is kind of remarkable. 6 judgments in the favor of a defendant in a county like that. So I had a lot of pull, and I had a lot of sway, and I got a lot done. And then I left that, and as I said, I've been a trial lawyer. I've taken on one of the first cases I got involved in when I came to Kingston was a class action lawsuit against Hudson Cement Plant that was dropping toxic dust on East Kingston. And the toxic dust from the cement factories were spewing out arsenic and mercury, polluting the land, the groundwater, the air, and people were getting lung problems, and all kinds of things were happening in an entire community that was right there next to the cement plant. Right? So the people who worked at the cement plant were getting dumped on by that cement plant. So anyway, I'm not. Corporate power is something I'm well familiar with. Corporations putting profit over people is something I'm well familiar with. I have fought those battles over and over and over again. And I've done it my whole career. And I've taken on these corporations and I've won. And so I think I bring to the table something nobody else. There's a lot of people talking about corporate power and corporate abuse. Some of them have been corporate attorneys representing corporations. Others have been in other ways, saying now corporate power is what we have to attack. What I say is, I'm not talking the talk. I have walked the walk for decades. And there's nobody else in this group of fine candidates that can say that or have done it. So I think that's kind of a difference. Now, right now, I'm the chair of the Human Rights Commission. I've been involved on the board of Family Woodstock for the last 15 years. They do the homeless shelter, the women's shelter, the runaway teenage shelter, the after-school programs, the child care programs, all those things I've been involved with. I've gotten, 25 years of coaching in the Midtown Rec League, young men that I find it's one of the great joys of my life. But honestly, coaching, you can really do a lot of good to not only for your team. I actually did the Pat Riley thing. So I would always wear my suit, a full suit, to the games at Midtown. So, the kids from the street would say, hey, this guy really thinks that much of us. He'll come in here and wear a suit while the Cleggs are approaching. I have, I have sponsored 3 teams in every division in the basketball league for the last 25 years, as well as coaching in the league. And I believe in helping the kids, giving them a direction, mentoring them. I've been involved as I said, chair of the Human Rights Commission. Before that, 2 terms as the Board of Health in Ulster County, trying to prevent toxic dumping and trying to track the Lyme disease problem and all those things that we do on the Board of Health. Chair is one of the things I'm proudest of is as the chair of the Human Rights Commission. It was not that active a commission. And I got the opportunity to get on it, and I'd done restorative justice work in my studies at Yale Divinity School back in the mid-2000s, and I was convinced that was an approach we needed to take with our juvenile justice system. And then it came to my attention how much it's affecting the schools, that the zero tolerance punitive approach to discipline was moving the, quote, school to prison pipeline situation. And so when I got out of Divinity School and I got on the Human Rights Commission, I wanted to approach that. And we got engaged, and Judge Judith Kay was somebody that I knew. She was the head of the Court of Appeals here in the state. And she was involved down in New York City in a forum involving that. And I asked her personally, would you come to Ulster County and let's talk about that, let's get something going. And she agreed to do that. So we had her, and then I've been there for 30 plus years, so I know everybody. So I got all the judges, the county court judge who used to be the DA, who actually worked for me for a couple of years. Don Williams, got him to come, and the family court judges, and the DA, and the public defender, and Mike Hine, the county executive. So we really had this moment, and I won't forget that either, because we came in, and Judge Kay was there, and she was so sweet, and she's passed away now, but there was we had about 150 really energized people in the room, and there was just a buzz. She said, I've never heard a buzz like this. This is remarkable. And so I brought in somebody from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to talk about implicit bias. I wanted my county court judge to hear about that. Why are we putting more black people in jail than we should? You know, understanding the background. So it was a wonderful forum, and it got us going. And then we had the Kingston High School, which had its own problems with disproportionality. And they decided to embark on that. So I met with their board and I met with their administration. And I actually helped draft a new disciplinary code for them. And they are now adopting the restorative justice approach to discipline. And you know, I could go into all the details about that. But once again, it's about keeping kids in school, holding them accountable, but not kicking them out of class, not kicking them out of school, and not expelling them. But finding a way to find out what the problem is and reach them and bring them back into the fold. And it's a win-win-win if you can do it. It takes more funding. I talk about this on the federal level. Kingston doesn't have the funding it needs to do this. You need more social workers, psychologists, school psychologists, a dean of discipline that's got to have a restorative training. You need to train your teachers. They're working on it. They're doing their best. It's like a 2-year transition right now. But we should be funding that from the federal government. I know the Obama administration was supportive of it. Obviously, Betsy DeVos is not going to do anything about it. But we from Congress can fund that kind of approach. And once again, I think I'm the only place I'd say you could label me conservative. I'm conservative about preserving the potential of every child. And that I see it on the other end. Another thing that I do is I've been involved in the Rising Hope program at Woodburn Prison. And that's a religious-based college-level coursework that we do. So I teach ethics, and I teach homiletics, and I teach world religion. And you do it at a college level, and you prepare the guys who are ready to get out so that, you know, they can be educated enough to get a job, right? So that their skills in writing and reading are uplifted before they come out. Because these guys have been in there. And I had one course that homiletics, that's preaching, that's doing sermons. So at the end I have I do one for them, and you reach back and you go real personal. And so each of them were real personal, and most of them went back to before they were in prison and how they got there. And you listen to these stories about how these guys wound up where they were. And there's one guy who could have been at Yale because he was so smart, so well written, so experienced, so intelligent. And he was talking about when he was 15 years old, his mother threw him out of the house for a new boyfriend. And he talked about how he wanted to stand up on top of his apartment building and just jump off and land on the front stairs. But he didn't have the courage to do that, so he just went out on the street. And at some point in time, it became him or another person, and the other guy lost, and he murdered somebody. And then 27 years later, he's in prison. So you see, this kid didn't have the chance. He got thrown out of school. He got thrown out of his house. He could have really had a productive life if we had saved that kid. But we spent a couple $1 million keeping him in prison. So I've seen both ends of that. And so those are the kind of things that I've been involved in. Those are the kind of things I believe in. The one thing I want to say is everything I've talked about has been on my own dime. That I have never taken any public money for anything I've ever done. I've earned my keep. And I've contributed because I believe in the community. And I've never taken anything from the community except I've given back. And I think that's important. If people want to know what kind of commitment you really have as a politician. I'm not here to take anything from anybody. I'm not here to get anything. I'm not here to be famous or to get political power. I'm here because I see a system that's broken, and I see corruption is rampant, and I see a Democratic Party that's all over the place and not defining itself and not representing the people that I see in my community. And I offer myself, and I'm good at what I do, and I win at whatever I do. And so that's why I'm here. And if the electorate, and I know this is a tough election, I hear everybody, we're all wonderful, and at some level we are all wonderful. Who can beat John Faso? I'm confident that I can beat John Faso. And I don't have any skeletons. I just have a lot of good works in the community. If they want to yell at me and call me whatever, it's not going to resonate because it'll be false. And so here we are.
So I just wanted to clarify a couple things. So because you kind of went through a lot of years there.
Yes.
So when you say you returned to New York in 1981, that was to Kingston?
It was to Kingston originally, and we lived in Kingston until 1987, and we moved to Woodstock.
And that's where you currently are?
That's
still?
where I currently
Okay.
am, yes.
And so is that what you consider, I mean, that's where you raised your children, I guess?
Yeah, our kids have been, you see, most of everything has been in Kingston because our kids actually went to the Kingston School District. We're on the Kingston side of Woodstock. My office is in Kingston. The church that I belong to is in Kingston. So our life has been centered more in Kingston than it has been in Woodstock.
Gotcha. Okay. And so you were talking about your career as an attorney. Did you, and public defender, and you said you were at the end of your career. So are you? Still
I like to say the zenith.
Right. Okay.
So I've got all these years of experience. I am at a point that I have all this experience and skills, and I actually tried a case during this campaign and won a substantial verdict in the middle of making appearances.
So you're still practicing?
I'm still practicing at a level. I had to take it down about 90 to 95% in order to do this, to make the commitment. So I started off last July, and I had an ongoing practice that I had slowed to do social justice work. So all the things I've been talking about for the last, since I was ordained as a deacon in the United Methodist Church, that is my social justice work as an attorney. So I'm centered out of my law practice, not out of church. I'm not doing sermons and preaching for the most part, although I do on occasion. It's work in the community. So that's where I slowed my practice down, as I said, about 4 or 5 years ago at about 50-75%. So over the last year, I've slowed it down another 40%.
I was going to, you're probably going to go down this road, but do we get back on the number of kids?
No, can we talk about that? Yes.
What? Sure.
Can you give us your age and your family?
Sure.
Yeah.
My age is 65. I am younger than John Faso, just so we're clear on that, by 3 months. And I've got 2 children, my daughter Jessica. Of course, I've got my wife, Karen. We've been married for 40 years. And we actually met when I was 17 and she was 16. So we've been together quite some time. My daughter is 36. She was born in 1982. And my son was born in 1985.
What's his name?
Andrew. And he's in Los Angeles, and he is working for a major public interest firm doing homeless prevention work as an attorney.
What's your daughter's name?
Jessica.
And back to your education quickly. You said that you, with your bachelor's, you graduated from SUNY New Paltz.
Yes.
What was your degree in from there?
Sociology.
Sociology. And then you went on to law school at New Buffalo. Correct?
Yes.
Did you have any other academic degrees or?
Just a master's of religion from Yale.
How did you get that while living in Woodstock?
It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
I actually was still working. I was commuting. It took me 4 years to do a 2-year program.
That's some commute. That's crazy.
I've been told that. But of course, it was like going back to high school, right? I did in high school too. So, yeah, it wasn't easy though, I'll tell you.
Well, I think going into New Haven is a little different than going over the Verrazano.
Yeah, it was. It was. You know, it was both, what a privilege it was at the same time. There's so much more writing. I was surprised at that in divinity school than there is in law school. Law school, you know, they cram you've got to read all these dense books and cases, but you basically at the end have to be able to pass a final exam. At divinity school, they want you to write 3 papers for every course, and 15 to 25 page papers, an ongoing full load of cases at work. It was a lot, but yeah, got it done.
Impressive.
Yeah. So, do you have I mean, you kind of touched on an issue already, but do you your platform that you've been running on, I guess over the past year, I think you've been campaigning.
Yes.
What has your platform been centered on? What's you think the most important issue?
Once again, Medicare for All, I think, is the most important issue. But it runs across the board. The environment, I mean, there's about 20 close seconds to that. We know that income inequality is really having a horrible effect on many, many, many people in our district, and there's a loss of hope in some folks, and we have to change that. And I've been talking about that with everybody. The farm community. I just had a sustainable farming forum over in Oneonta, and which was great. And there's a guy named Mark Davies who's a doctor over at Hartwick College who's involved in a sustainable farming group there, and he's also the head of the Oneonta environmental advocacy group. And I met him, and so we've been working together. My brother-in-law, Dave Mortensen, is a nationally recognized sustainable farming expert out of Penn State. He actually has been fighting the battle against GMOs and Monsanto for the last decade. He's testified in front of Congress. He was appointed to the Board of Organic Farming by President Obama. And he's a big wig in that world, and he's really a committed sustainable farming advocate. So he actually joined me. This is part of my bike hike, too. He joined me on my bike hike. We had the forum in Oneonta, had people who were throughout the areas, and talking about all the difficulties that the farmers have. And I just see this is a moment in time, a moment of crisis, where if we can get through it and we do the right thing, we have such potential for our district to be a special place. We have the best watershed in the country, almost. All the problems, and I'm not going to go through all, but the western part of the world has water problems. The Colorado no longer reaches the Pacific. We have 20,000-acre agribusiness dairy farms in Arizona that are flooding the market, the supply market, and killing the small-scale dairy farmers in our world here. The dairy farmers can't make it at the level that it's at. Their scale is too small to compete with those 20,000-acre farms in Arizona can't keep going. Maybe they have a decade. Who knows when the water totally runs out? We have the water. We have the infrastructure. We have the farms. We're the best place to produce milk. And yet, the Otsego farming community lost 150 dairy farms over the last decade. What do we do about it? We have all these farms going fallow. We have great soil. We have great, infrastructure. The farms are there. We have this transition. The average age of the farmers in our district is like 60 years old. We have this huge transition that has to be made. People are not stepping up. There's not enough people stepping up to do that. We really need to treat it, and one of the advocates there said this, and I will adopt it. We need to treat food as a public good. We need to treat farming as a public good. Just like we do, the fire department and the police department. It's part of our public good. We support it. We make sure that it works. If we continue to support, and in all kinds of creative ways, not just from the federal level, state, local, make sure we buy like all those things we have to do. But if we can keep our farming community viable, it can be a special resource forever into the future. We have to vision and see it as that. Because right now it's a crisis. If we don't do that, we're going to lose it. They're going to go fallow. It's going to be woods again. The cost of undoing all the harm that's done is going to be catastrophic. It's never going to be there. This is a moment in time when we need to do it. I rail against John Faso. He's on the Ag Committee. You look at the Farm Bill. It's taking away grants from the micro-entrepreneur farming community. Taking away grants for that, as opposed to we should be doing everything we can. You all know 95% of our subsidies goes to agribusiness. That's happened over a course of decades, where the corporate influence in our Congress has deviated subsidies to the family farm, to the farms that we have, the small farming community, away to agribusiness. Now, agribusiness can take care of itself. we need to support, and especially in our district, the small family farm. And so that's just one area. You know, we could keep talking about all areas. Broadband is a huge area that we have to, if we could make sure, and I say, you know, creative ideas, I say we do a new WPA where we rewire the rural communities for broadband. And why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? You know, everything leads into, you know, we talk about net neutrality and all the important issues. We have our internet providers taking control of our lives. You have the Amazons of the world who are going to, you know, dominate the internet, and the new entrepreneurs won't be able to be seen. But let's get access to broadband for everybody. They do it in Delhi. There's an entrepreneur in Delhi who had offices in LA and New York City, and he moved back to Delhi, and he's hired 45 people, and he's doing some kind of business support business from Delhi because they have fiber optic wiring in Delhi. Some prior supervisor had the foresight to do that. Boom. If you could live in a beautiful community with mountains and meadows and horses and cows and everything around you is beautiful and quiet, and you could still operate a world-class something, why wouldn't you do it? Broadband is necessary, though. You have farmers that have to go to the local, you know, cafe in order to get on the internet to do their work. We could do better. So broadband's another thing that I think would facilitate job growth. And education, obviously, is a big thing. There's a lot of creative stuff going on with BOCES programs and community colleges. It's there. We need to support it from the federal government more than we are. Training programs, technical training programs. One of the things I highlighted, and I believe once again we need to do, is I did my bike ride 200 miles. We have 13 Superfund sites in our district. We have a ton of brownfields in our district. We have corporate polluters that have, you know, the Hudson River obviously is one, but Hoosick Falls and on and on and on. We are not giving the money to the Superfund to do that cleanup anymore. That's been taxpayer money since 1995 when Newt Gingrich took away the tax that was originally set up for the fund, which was to tax chemical companies and fossil fuel industry, the people who've caused the pollution, to pay for the cleanup of that pollution. That stopped in 1995. Since then, it's been on the taxpayer dime. It needs to go back. There's a Superfund Polluters Pay Act. We got to get that back in place. Let's get that back in place. Let's get people trained to do hazardous waste removal. Another high-paying technical job that will take decades to do in our district. Let's get the government to fund it because from the polluter's tax. And once again, you have a whole range of jobs. And then the clean energy move, incentivizing clean energy, wind, solar, geothermal, water, hydro. All those things are things we can and should be doing. We're at a stage where our whole economy is going to change to a green energy future. Governor Cuomo said he wants to go there, but he's kind of taking his time. We need to incentivize that and stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. We all know that in the clean energy world, we create more jobs than we do in the fossil fuel industry by 10 times over. That's a new future for us, once again, with technical training and support. So there's all kinds of potential. There are for jobs, technical training that we could subsidize and support with grants, with funding. So yes, and who holds the key? I teach in my ethics course about distributive justice, which goes back to Locke and at Woodburn Prison. And you know, these guys get it more than Congress does. What is distributive justice? What the Congress is supposed to be about distributive justice, but what they're doing is they're redistributing money that they get to taxes to corporations. And I talk about this all the time too. It's a phenomenal fact. In 1932, when both John Faso and I were born, the share that the corporations paid of our annual budget was 32%. After this last tax bill, and there's 1 million more corporations, and they're making millions of trillions more dollars, their share is 7%. So we talk about fair share taxes. We've gone a long ways away from fair share taxes. And that's distributive justice. Let's invest in people. Let's give, we've got this income inequality. This was the most regressive tax bill in memory that just happened. It's throwing money, as we know, the trickle-down theory, which doesn't work. Maybe, they say, maybe 12% of that tax deduction will float down to the employee level. Maybe, probably not. We can do better. So those are some of the issues I think are really important, and there's more, but those are some of them.
Awesome. So, thank you. That overview was really comprehensive. That's good. So also wanted to ask you, where do you stand on the whole gun violence debate? Yeah,
that's interesting. I see banning the AR-15 or all semi-automatics as a starting place. That's not the ending place. That's not, it's a nice slogan, but it doesn't get us there. And there's a lot more that needs to be done. Comprehensive background checks, we all talk about that. I was at a gun event over in Hudson at the high school. I don't know if any of you were there. I got to ask a question of John Faso at the end that kind of backed him into a corner that he couldn't get out of, which I was very proud of, on the H.R. 38 statute, the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. And I got both the chief of police here and the sheriff to say, no, that's a bad act. We don't like that. That's gonna be a problem for us. And then Faso had to try and defend a statute that allows stalkers and people with no vetting and with violent backgrounds to get some gun in Arkansas or in Arizona or Alaska to come into our state with a concealed carry weapon without any permit and leaving the police at risk. And the best thing he could come up with was, well, it already passed the House and he sponsored it. Well, it may not pass the Senate. You'll be happy to hear it may not pass this. That's his response. But anyway, so what I think, and this ties into other work that I've done, I have also been involved with the local women's shelter for the last 3 decades. It's called the Washburn Shelter. George Washburn was a friend of mine. Our church had adopted the women's shelter, so every year we would do, at Christmas time, and provide diapers and all those kinds of things throughout the year that they needed, and George would be the one that would take it over there. But I've been involved from time and time again. The people who were in charge there, if somebody got in a legal scrape, they knew they could contact me. So I've, over the last 3 decades, done hundreds and hundreds of hours pro bono work with a domestic violence shelter there. And I've also gotten to be intimately knowledgeable about the issues that they face and about the men and the harm that's done to the family and how devastating it is and how tough it is to recover. But when you look at the mass shootings, and this is something that 54% of the mass shootings that have happened in this country have started with the murder of an intimate partner or family member. 54%. 57% of the people who committed mass murders, including the Pulse nightclub, including Santa Fe, including Parkland, have demonstrated violence toward their family or their intimate partner before. Even the Las Vegas shooter was abusive to his significant other before this event. That history of family violence, of violence toward your intimate partner, is something that has obviously practiced the violence of these people, then go out and commit these mass murders. We have to see the connection. There are only 27 states take away the guns of people who've been convicted of domestic violence at any level, sometimes only during the pendency of restraining order, sometimes only after a final restraining order is done, many not at all. That we've allowed domestic violent persons to retain their guns. There's no excuse for that. We should, we talk about studying gun violence. It's right there in front of you. That's a majority of the gun violent cases have arisen from domestic violence situations. We don't have to study it too long. We see it. It's there. Let's do something about it at a national level. Let's make sure that any domestic abuser doesn't have the right to retain their guns and doesn't have the right to get a gun. So that's another thing. I'm also manufacturers. I've done product liability. I've seen cases, and I know the intimate inside, where corporations decide a safety issue versus a profit issue. And if they can get away with it, they decide on the profit side. And I've seen cases where a family was devastated, a mother killed and a daughter brain damaged by a truck company that wanted these fancy stainless steel bumpers. And they could have had breakaway bumpers, and they knew the bumper, if it was contacted in a minor accident, would go into the wheel. And once you got a 20,000-pound dump truck going down the road with a wheel that's blown, you can do terrible things. And they knew about it, and they decided, we need that shiny bumper. That's what the buyer wants to see. And so I've seen, once again, time and time again, now we don't make the manufacturers of guns face that dilemma. They could do safety technology on their guns that would prevent a 3-year-old from taking a pistol out of somebody's drawer that is negligent and leaves it loaded in a drawer from picking it up and shooting themselves or somebody else. And, you know, that's the person that's most likely to do it, a 3-year-old. So 7,000 children are shot with a gun a year, you know, and half of those are accidental. These things are things that the gun manufacturers could design against, but we have given them an immunity. Congress has given them an immunity they don't deserve, they should not have. We want to stop gun violence. They should be part of the process. You figure out how to design guns that can be safer and that we can protect people from. If there's a way, you should be part of this. And we don't make them a part of it. They don't have to be part of it. They have carte blanche to just make as much money off their guns as they possibly can. So that's another issue that I believe in strongly.
Your turn.
Well, I mean, you know, I guess let's start with, can you tell us about your stance on immigration?
Yes. I will tell you, starting with, as on the Human Rights Commission, we've taken a stance on, we have a sanctuary city to a level in Kingston, and we've supported that. And we've had testimony from Dreamers, both here and in Sullivan County, listening to their concerns and what can we do to support them in the meantime. I have been engaged with the Workers' Justice Program, and I have met with the local county clerk in Ulster County. What we want to do is a green light driver's permit so that people in our community who are not documented can get access to a driver's license. And what that will do will be to allow them to get on the road, own cars. Right now it creates a more dangerous situation because if they have access to a car, they can't get insurance, they can't get properly registered. They are vulnerable to arrest and being removed, obviously. At the same time, it creates a more dangerous situation for the people on the street. If you give them licenses, they've got to do what everybody else does, which is make sure they can drive properly, get insurance, make sure that they're taking care of the other drivers on the road. So it's once again, it's a sensible approach to how to help the situation in the interim before we get a final Immigration Reform Act that will allow a path to citizenship for the people who've been productive, part of our economy, law-abiding, have given back to our communities. Let's find a way for them to earn citizenship. Let's get the Dreamers, obviously, the right to be citizens. Those are the one. It's another area where I say I'm not just talking the talk. I've walked the walk, and I've been supporting that community. I'll continue to support that community.
What do you think of the Justice Department's rules about separating the children from the parents as a deterrent?
It is, you know, and I quoted this, when does abhorrent become evil? Right? That's what I see it as. I'm a human rights activist. I'm a Christian. I don't know where the Christian right is on this issue. The Christian center, I know, and the Christian left, whatever you want to call it. Any person that has any humanity in them should be crying at what we're doing, and it's unforgivable that they're doing that. It is inhumane. It is against the UN Charter on Refugees. It is against international law. I don't know what more to say, that it just absolutely is horrible and should not be happening. I know there's class actions that are being brought right now. I wish I was involved in one, but I got something else going on. The ACLU is doing it. Yeah, at every level we should attack this. There is a Keep Families Together Act that's being passed through the Senate right now. I don't know what the Republicans are going to do with it, but I'd obviously be fully supportive of stopping that immediately.
Go ahead.
Okay. What do you think of the president's meeting with North Korea this past week?
I think he's been played for a fool. I think it's on the comical side. It's funny to see Dennis Rodman, Kim Jong-un, and Donald Trump on the same level. I think there's at some perverse level the two get each other, and it's very dangerous. Those two, and the fact that a president of the United States elevates a mass murdering dictator to the same level as you know the president of the most powerful and freedom-loving country in the world is outrageous to me. And the fact, from any diplomatic standpoint, he gave everything away. He's given, you know, Kim Jong-un everything he wanted: status, equal status. Threw away the war games issue right off the top of his head. Got nothing back than the same promise that was made to the Clinton administration back in 1992. So at every level, it was foolish and stupid. We should be dialoguing with them. And denuclearization is something that would be wonderful. And, you know, I think, unfortunately, the cat's probably out of the bag on that one. I think they're playing with fool's gold to think that North Korea is going to do that based on any promise. But I think it's a sham. The whole thing is a sham. He's trying to make it look like he got something done. He did nothing but lose whatever initial bargaining power we had. Because one of the biggest things, and that's why no president has met with him, by the way, it's not because they weren't willing to, it's because they could never set it up so they got something concrete back when it happened. And Trump blew that off like that didn't matter. And now he got nothing and gave everything away to start off with.
Tariffs. What's your feeling about what's happening with tariffs?
Well, you know, it goes along with the way we're treating our allies altogether. It's unbelievably bad, stupid, short-sighted. You know, tariffs, if targeted, if there's some unfair labor practice going on, if there's some unfair tariffs being conducted by a specific country, you know, once again, under international law, we have the right to target that specific problem. But that's not what he's doing. He's trying to, you know, protect our steel on the basis of national security issues with steel from Canada. How do you justify that? You can't justify that. So it's unjustifiable under law. And that's a bad starting place. Plus, it upsets, or not upsets, it's going to harm other businesses in our country, harm other businesses of our allies, create a tariff war with our allies. We lose trust, we lose good faith, and then he goes off and he spouts off about people in his junior high school manner. Once again, it's degrading us before the entire world. Losing loyalty, losing trust, losing faith at every level. It's all bad, in my opinion. It's done from a point of stupidity and lack of intelligence, lack of legal backing. All of those things are lacking, and that's not the way you conduct yourself, especially with your allies.
Just for a second, I want to go back to how you were talking about that you support Medicare for all.
Yes.
I know there are, actually the other candidates who've come in have discussed whether they support the bill, I think it's HR 676.
Yes.
And then there's also, they also discussed, obviously it's Bernie Sanders' bill in the Senate, the difference. Can you talk about support?
Well, I actually like HR 676, and I like the way that it's funded. I think that HR 676, you start with a progressive tax on the top 5%. You also add excise taxes and employment taxes to a degree. You also tax unearned income. And that goes together. I'd like to throw in the hedge fund guys and the carried interest issue. Hedge fund guys pay proportionally less of their income than I do. I pay more in taxes proportionally than they do for what they earn. There's no excuse for that. I know there's a reasoning behind it, but it's a shallow set of reasoning. So you have hedge fund managers making $1 billion a year, and pay less percentage-wise than I do on my net income. And there's a lot of people out there that's excusable. So I say, let's tax unearned income. You know, capital gains is lower than most other taxes, unless you don't make much money, in which case it might be lower. But the capital gains tax is something that we could add to and fund Medicare for all and provide universal, and when I use that, when I say health care for everybody, I hate universal has gotten too overused. John Faso uses universal health care. And what that means is universal access. And what that means is if you can afford it, you can get health care. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about care for everybody in this country. And I'm a small businessman. I've never had an obligation to pay health care for my employees, but I've always done it. And that's where I come from. And so I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on my employees' health care over the years. That was a huge expense. You take that off the top of small businessmen, they can give it back in wages and investments and making their company more productive. And it would be a win-win-win for 95% of the people in this country. The top 5% is going to pay a little more, but I think for the good of the country, they could afford it.
So you would vote in favor of that 6
I would.
Okay. How about the governor's race here in the state? Do you have any thought to who you would support?
Well, I've talked about this. I have a lot of issues with campaign finance reform. I mean, a lot of heart behind the need for that, and we're not doing that at the state level the way we should. For that, and he should take the lead in campaign finance reform here in our state. He's in a position to do that. He could lead more than he has, which has been shallow at this point. I like the proposals of Cynthia Nixon. She's more progressive. I don't mean to say that Governor Cuomo hasn't achieved a lot of good things. He has. Stopping fracking was important. The allowing marriage between gay folks was very important. Marriage equality is important, gender equality is important. All those things I think he's talking about are important, and I'm glad that he's talking about those things. But campaign finance reform is something that's close to my heart, and I would like to see more done.
How about your own campaign? How have you, when you talk about that's close to your heart, so you said you've had a grassroots campaign. I mean, how much have you raised, and how has that done that?
It's the worst part of running for office. It is, once again, I'll use the unconscionable word that we have to use in terrible situations where you're expected to go out and beg, borrow, and steal money first from your friends and neighbors and your family, and then you have to go asking rich people for money to run for Congress. It's a bad situation. We need to do it differently. We need to get public financing, and the biggest thing we need to do is get our media licensing folks out in the world of television, radio, and our licenses that we give from our federal government to them require that they do a public interest give back. We should ask them to give back to viable candidates free airtime so that we can reach the public with our platforms and who we are. And people can actually have an educated decision about who to vote for. Right now, the majority of money in any campaign, if they can afford it, is going to media. And not in my campaign, but those that you see on TV are spending the majority of their money on media. And that's how they get their name recognition out. And so it's a downward spiral. So the people who can ask for the most money, and you know who has the money, and whatever their agenda is something they have to pay attention to. That's, John Faso was the starting place for that. So what is the cost of that of our entire government? We have a corrupting finance system for our elections process. We have to change that. And I see it up close and personal. Now, I'm not taking money from Wall Street, and I'm not taking money from corporate executives, and I'm not taking money from the for-profit healthcare industry. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that I don't want to be in any way beholden to anybody but the people I'm going to represent.
How much have you raised?
Including the amount that I've donated, we've raised a total of about $700,000.
Can I follow up on that with polling? Do you have you done internal polling? Have you seen other polls that tell you where you may stand right now?
I saw one poll, and that there is a stratification of the candidates. I'm not sure, and I'm up there, but I'm not certainly at the top. What I think, though, and as I've looked at the polling, is they can't poll me very effectively. Because what a poll does is they got to reach 400 people, and those 400 people are going to be people who are primary voters, right? Who are the primary voters out there? Let's get this segment. So I come from a different place. So my voters are not necessarily somebody who voted in the primary, ever. My voters are people who knew me for the last 30 years plus, and the people who know them, and the people who know them. And so I'm not worried about the polls. Can't do anything about them anyway. I'm on a path that may be enough to win. Could I say I am? I certainly can't. The odds against it, with all the money out there, certainly is. But do I have a puncher's chance? I do.
Talk about all these issues, and you have a lot of interesting ideas, just listening to you. But how do you plan to get those things done when you get into office? And I assume through possibly getting consensus around issues, but I mean, you're already talking about how there's a corruption in our system,
Yeah,
that keeps things like income inequality.
Right.
As.
Sure.
So how do we do that from your position?
Well, you have to hope, and I do hope. I've met a lot of the candidates. I was down there with 110 candidates for this Congress, and I think that the people coming in are of a different mind for the most part, and want to try and accomplish the things I've been saying. So if we can come in with a wave, if we can get 30 more congressmen and congresspersons, and those persons are similar in their beliefs that we have to change the system, we can start the ball rolling. I always talk about this. This is a partnership. If you want Medicare for all, and there's no question in my mind that it's the best thing for our country, but if you want that, just like if you don't want the NRA to control our Congress, you better not vote for somebody who takes NRA money. And if you want Medicare for all, you better be voting for somebody who wants Medicare for all. And you better let that be known out there, because it's the politicians will pay attention to the vote. So we have the internal moral righteousness of, we are trying to help 300 million people in this country, and we have to bump aside a number of special interests to do that in a way that due process applies. We're not going to be confiscating. We're going to be providing whatever due process allows for whatever change, when they change from profit to nonprofit. We're not going to be doing this in an illegal manner, but we are going to be doing it for the best interest of the entire country. So that needs to be shouted from the rooftops on both sides. And so that can bring pressure on people. That's a start. You need people who are going to advocate. I've advocated my whole life, wherever I've been. That's what I do. I advocate, push forward. I have to play the chess game. When I take on a multinational corporation with a big Wall Street law firm that's got 5 different attorneys trying to figure out how to win the case, I've got to figure out how to stop them from winning the case and how I'm going to win the case. That's what you do. And you play that I call it procedural combat. You know, we have to get out there and we have to outthink them, out-strategize them, outwork them, and get the attention we need to push forward the agenda that we believe needs to happen.
You mentioned the wave, blue wave, potentially. I asked this of one of the candidates the other day. I drove in the other day and I see new sticker, and save the environment.
Yeah.
How are you going to get Trump voters when it comes to a general election to come off of Trump?
Sure. Well, you're not going to get the Trump voters to get off of Trump, as far as I can see. But what you can do is get them to support me as opposed to Faso, and I don't think that's nearly as big a hurdle on a number of levels. I will say, I've been out there in the sportsman sheds and talking to the guys in the pickups and the Trump signs, and you know, I've once again been here for a long time. I'd say a third of the people, my friends, are Republicans, and not all of them, but a good portion of them are Trump supporters. I talk with them all the time. Anybody who gets to know me says I don't vote for the party, I vote for the person. And they said they're going to vote for me. So that's an easy start. But the bigger thing is Faso doesn't have the same attraction as Trump does. And when I talk to the macho guys out there, they don't like Faso. He doesn't show up. He's like a scaredy cat. You know, he doesn't man up. He doesn't, you know, he's not out there showing any moral courage for his positions. He is avoiding us. That doesn't ring true with a lot of folks. So I don't see that Faso and Trump are aligned in terms of that voter. I think Trump is, and Trump is only going to be a part of this when we have to talk about it. And I'm going to tell the truth, which I do, what I think about him, what I think he's doing. But he's not going to be the focus. If you watch my campaign and you watch what I've said, Faso has always been the focus. And it will continue to be the focus. And that's how you beat John Faso.
How about a few words on the opioid crisis? It's a serious problem here and in Greene County.
Yes. Here in Greene, and Sullivan's the second worst in the state. And as I said before, I've worked with people who've been addicted for many, many, many years. And I know the problem. And I'll tell you just a quick little story, which is horrendous. Medicare for All is part of this because we need the comprehensive medical, rehabilitative, mental health, counseling support before and after. It takes a comprehensive and he's in jail. And I actually get some resistance, which surprised me, from the DA and the judge. But I eventually pushed through that, so okay, we'll get him rehabilitation. He has insurance. So he said, okay, well, you line it up and we'll release him from jail. So I call up, and it turns out that his insurance company won't cover him because he's no longer addicted. He's detoxified in jail. So he's not actively addicted, so they will not cover his rehabilitation. So talk about a catch-22. What do you want him to do? Go back out on the street and take a hit so we can get him into rehabilitation? Horrendous. That was the story in that case. So those are the kind of things that should never, ever happen. We need, obviously, there's, once again, a comprehensive approach. My wife used to work in a halfway house. And when we were back in Nebraska, and people recovering from addiction, that was a good program. They had people in the house to support, supervise, watch over. So you need those kind of halfway houses. You're not quite ready. You've had your experience for rehabilitation. You know what you're supposed to do. You need some support and health after that, and you need that continuing both counseling and somebody supporting you in whatever way they can to get you past those really vulnerable points in time when you're just recovering early on. So once again, I'm somewhat familiar, very familiar, more than most, in people recovering from addiction, and I'd be I'd have the experience and knowledge to try and contribute to that discussion.
But you think Medicare for all is the way to try to...
That would go a long ways. That would go a long ways.
Is there anything else you feel we missed, or anything else you want to add?
I'm sure there's something I've missed, but you've done a really excellent job of getting me to tell you a lot of stuff. So I can't think of anything overly important except that I thank you for the time you've all given me. You've been good listeners.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, you're very
Thank you.
busy, so...
Thank you.
appreciate it.
My pleasure.